Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this event. May I start by inviting Dr. Subramaniam Swami and Mr. Jitender Bhargava to the stage. May I also invite Devashish Basu to come? Let me start by asking Mr. Bhargava to welcome Dr. Swami with a bouquet of flowers. I'm Sucheta Dalal, one of the founding trustees of Moneylife Foundation. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Mumbai launch of Mr. Jitender Bhargava's book, The Descent of Air India. I'm especially delighted to welcome Dr. Subramaniam Swami, who is one of the most brilliant and frank political leaders and, of course, very, very popular with Moneylife Foundation members. Today evening, we are going to, of course, hear from Mr. Bhargava about what happened to Air India. Air India is especially important in most of our lives because I think the trajectory that Air India has taken sort of mirrors what has happened in the Indian economy. It started as this wonderful airline started by the legendary J.R.D. Tata, and it was one of the best airlines in the world. I'm sure a lot of youngsters in their 20s who are here today find it really hard to believe. And it has come down to the level where it is largely irrelevant. And I think that is exactly what is happening to our economy also. What is wonderful is that we have somebody like Dr. Swami who's going to talk not just about Air India, but about civil aviation in general. Because what has happened in Air India is bad. There is a huge 30,000 crore loss that is sitting in the books. But what is happening to civil aviation is an equally bizarre story of conspiracy. We've always kept saying that when privatization happened, the first licenses went out not to people who had the deep pockets to run an airline, but to a poultry farmer and to somebody who has underworld links. Half the airlines were closing down. Somebody who decided that he had a dream to make travel affordable came in, which was wonderful, but couldn't run it profitably. And then today, you have a situation where some of the largest deals are under question. You're going to hear more about it today. I request Devashish to introduce the speakers, please.
Good evening, distinguished guests, friends in the audience. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce both Mr. Jitender Bhargava and Mr. Subramaniam Swami today. Let me first start with a few words about Mr. Bhargava, the author of this terrific book called The Descent of Air India. Mr. Bhargava was the executive director of Air India till January 2010, when he retired at the age of 58. In his over 2 decades with Air India, 13 years of which was spent at the level of executive director, Mr. Bhargava held various key positions, that of ED in-flight services, ED human resources, and then corporate communications. As the public face of Air India for over 2 decades, Mr. Bhargava has successfully put across the airline's point of view, eloquently and emphatically in print and electronic media thanks to his communication skills, backed by a deep knowledge of the aviation industry and a clear-headed approach to various industry issues. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Subramaniam Swami for the second time. He was the chief guest at Moneylife Foundation's 2nd anniversary, where he enlightened us with his humorous and very penetrating analysis of the 2G spectrum scam. Dr. Swami is an economist and a politician, now a leader of the Bharatiya Janata Party. But unlike most politicians who have forgotten why they are in public life and who never have been interested in public interest, he is a politician who spent his time fighting for the right causes. His 2012 success in Supreme Court with the 2G scam, which he fought single-handedly, is a culmination of his lifelong record as an independent-minded politician, an independent-minded academic, and an independent-minded economic thinker. He combined all of these skills to do that remarkable case in Supreme Court, which is now a legend. Dr. Swami has been consistently ahead of time in this manner with his views and completely unafraid to express them. He has publicly challenged and fought against prime ministers, chief ministers, and other high officials by filing cases of corruption and fraud in courts of law, and this is just done for the last 30-40 years. But the fact to remember in all this is that no one in the government or outside has yet found anything to charge him with, any offense, let alone file a case against him in a court in a country where these things are so easy to do and people go behind or trumped-up charges. Friends, please join me in welcoming Dr. Swamy, a rare politician who fights for us.
We now start today's proceedings, first of all, by having Dr. Swamy launch the Bombay edition of The Descent of Air India. May I now invite Mr. Jitender Bhargava to speak about what motivated him to write this book?
Good evening and welcome to this evening. I'm grateful to Sucheta for having convened this meeting for this book release. And as she said, the book has something, and it concerns a company called Air India, which, as she very rightly said, the youngsters may not know, but Air India was not any company, it was an institution at one time. Now, there are two facets of Air India which are irrefutable and cannot be disputed. One, that it was once upon a time an iconic airline. Second, that today it is gasping for breath, awaiting government's funding to stay operational. The journey that it has traversed from iconic status to what it is today did call for narration, because Air India, as I said, was an institution. You couldn't have allowed what happened to Air India to be hidden and not put in public domain. Somebody had to do it. Because what made the whole journey of Air India from the heights to the ground was that it was man-made, it happened in broad daylight, it happened with all stakeholders keeping their eyes shut and not playing the role that they ought to have. They did not take decisions that should have been taken, but took decisions that should not have been taken. Now, one can go on and on to narrate what it is, but the tragedy has been that ever since J.R.D. Tata was booted out as chairman in 1978, the government meddling began, and every decision started to be taken by the government rather than by the company. And there are three facets that I've covered in the book of people within Air India. The first phase of people who could stand up to a minister and say, this will not be done. And the minister will not force them to do so. At that time, Air India was a great airline. The second phase was when there were people of substance still left in Air India who will put across the point of view to the minister, but eventually buckle in if the minister persisted. And the third phase, which is what is today, is that whether the minister wants to interfere or not, Air India senior people will still go to the minister for guidance and tell me, what do we do? So when your total kind of a think control has been given to the mandarins in the Rajiv Gandhi Bhavan from where the Civil Aviation Ministry functions, or the minister, you cannot help but see government meddling at all levels. Now, I have in my book, in the initial chapters, explained as to how is it that one individual, whether as a minister or as a chief executive, can run amok in the organization, take decisions. Because I came in from Coal India, I had seen a huge public sector company, though not as great in profile as Air India, but much larger than Air India. Now, it had systems, it had people, there were board representation for Air India, for Coal India senior people, and they could function and oppose the chairman's decision. But in Air India, I joined in 1989, and that was the year when Rajan Jetli, an outsider, was changing the corporate identity. And if you know that Mother or Scindia rolled it back later. When I joined and asked people, tell me, how is it that Rajan Jetli, with Ratan Tata as chairman, could go through this drill with so much opposition from within? This question, and they said, look, in Air India, seldom do people oppose. Why? They fear, people have joined the company at the initial stage of the career, and they generally retire from Air India. So they're beholden to the organization and to the incumbent, and they don't make a distinction between the company and the chief executive. I have in the book brought this out, that you need to be loyal to the company and not necessarily to the chief executive, because 30, 40 years ago, a chief executive was committed to the organization. But today's chief executives generally are not committed to that extent, because if somebody is offering more money, they're willing to move to another company. So this difference has not been noted. So with the result, senior management people were willing to play along as long as chief executive asked them to do, and they were assured of either promotion, post-retirement benefit, or something of that kind to go by. Now, when you had this kind of a culture in the organization, and second fault being that you were not mentoring people to hold senior positions. You had time-bound promotion like typical government organization, so you were not throwing up leaders from within who could stand up to a chief executive and say, I will not do this because it is against company's interest, long-term interest of the organization. So Air India's downward journey had began soon after 78. It's not a recent phenomenon. And once you have reached a certain stage, you suddenly find that you were not having people from within, and one man who came from outside could run the show. Rajan Jaitley was just one example. There were other people, even from within the company, who once they got into that chair, would take decisions that they thought were best, but were not necessarily good from the company's long-term perspective. Series of narrations of this kind, and then you come to a sad scenario that the government felt they have total freedom in appointing who would lead Air India. In my 20 years, 13 chief executives, 7 more chairmen, because they decided to break this post into chairman and managing directors at times and combining it well. Then there were any number of secretaries of civil aviation, any number of ministers. Where was the leadership? Where was the vision? Where was the direction for Air India? By default, it happened, and within the company, nobody was raising the voice on behalf of the airline. 2003, I would say, was a period when I, for the first time, after having made 2 attempts to quit the company, because I did not foresee the future for the airline in the long run, and I did advise a lot of people better look for jobs elsewhere, because Air India will not have future. First one being in 92. And so I was very clear that Air India will meet the kind of fate it has eventually met. You could read the writing on the wall if only you kept your eyes open. We all knew that the skies were being opened, but Air India had blinkers on. We continued with the old policies as they existed in the monopoly era. And the policies were being degraded, diluted over a period of time. For example, if you had rigid criteria for selection of cabin crew, you later started having examples of ministers, ministries, people, unions also dictating who should get selected as cabin crew. I have narrated an instance in it where Ghulam Nabi Azad gives me a list of 20 people and says, please take them. I said, look, 5 of them have gotten on merit. I can't. So he told the managing director, can you persuade Bhargav to take in all 20? He came in and said, no way that I'm going to do it. So what he did was scrap the whole selection process. Now that's the way the company is made to function. So when you have a weak management within, externally a lot of people playing the role, that's the unfortunate part. In 2003, I called it a flicker of hope in Air India, where I felt we had a man called Sunil Arora, CMD of Indian Airlines, but came to Air India for a very brief time. He was made to last only 5 months, but who gave Air India a direction. He came in at a stage when IPG had virtually, the strike had been neutralized and management had asserted its right to manage something that had been abdicated over a period of time. Now, he did not last very long, but he gave a direction like buying for new aircraft in the numbers that we could afford, not what subsequently it happened. The taking of IM people as corporate cadre for new people. He knew the weaknesses of Air India and said, I will go ahead and work on that line. Came in the next phase, and the next incumbent, Tulsi Das, has been in for a major attack in my book, and he countered it by writing an article in Economic Times a few days ago, because he came in and reversed the entire thing and became a total his master's voice. What he was told in Delhi, he was doing exactly that. Board meetings became a joke in Air India. Mr. V. Subramaniam was additional secretary, a member of Air India board. Air India was discussing the controversial aircraft acquisition. He asked basic questions that an MBA graduate will ask. Where is the business plan? Where will you deploy the aircraft? Where will you get the funding for the aircraft? Look at the pace at which the government works at times. He left Nariman Point for airport. And during this time, he had been transferred out of the Civil Aviation Ministry. Because chairman reported it to minister in turn reported to the PMO, people were interested there and he was out. You were not willing to listen to what sense and what was necessary from the company's perspective. Another, as we said, there are too many villains but very few heroes in Air India's history currently. You had Sunil Arora, Indian Airlines man, came, who did the best thing, and which I'm sure Mr. Subramani will make use of his letter. On June 2nd, 2005, he put the entire thing on paper and sent it to the cabinet secretary. A secret letter, stating very clearly, I'll produce excerpt from that letter, that before the board meeting, you are called by the minister to tell the board members what stands to take on a particular agenda item. And if you resisted, a comment that was included in the book is that once I and the Secretary of Civil Aviation have decided, were you having an opinion on it? Is that the way corporate governance functions? Now, when we have the Civil Aviation Minister behaving or the ministry behaving in this manner with no opposition from within, you are in for problem. The 10 aircraft that we were ordering in 2003, long-haul aircraft, were increased to 50. Now, in the Economic Times article, Tulsidas says we needed aircraft. Well, everybody knows we needed aircraft, but not in the number 50. 33,000 crore for an 8,500 crore turnover company and an industry which does not make more than 2% profit. How are you going to repay the money? It was as apparent that this is done. Now, this is daylight, as I say, murder of Air India. And shouldn't people be held responsible? So I have narrated the whole thing with factual analysis of the whole thing, that if Air India was to be in a position to pay back 2,800 crores per year, because the loans are repayable over a 10-12-year period, you will need a turnover of 75,000 crore. Now, 75,000 crore is not even the turnover of all Indian carriers put together with a much larger fleet size. So if the writing was so clear that this was an obnoxious decision being taken by the government with no regard to airlines' future, and the tragedy being, I hate to say because I see this thing, Mr. N. Ragul was an independent director on Air India's board. What was he doing? As a finance man, he ought to have raised the red flag and said, this is harakiri, you can't be doing it. But it happened that way. When you look at the other major decision, merger, Accenture, an established company, gave good recommendations. But tragedy, you pick up one clause of merging, but you don't attend to the other 15 recommendations given out. Equity infusion, moratorium on additional foreign capacity coming into India. There were a whole lot of sensible decisions given. You pick up one, but don't pick up the other one. The writing is on the wall. Now, everybody knew that Indian Airlines had a different work culture being in Delhi. Air India had a different work culture being in Mumbai. And when you put two together, there are going to be problems. Now, when did Dharmadhikari committee, which was appointed to look into for removal of disparities, appointed in May 2011? Why not in 2007 when the merger took place? Because as I've said in the book, anything that is good for Air India can wait. The cabinet, for the creation of MROs, the maintenance, repair and overhaul, and the ground handling business, took 2 years to take a decision. Dr. Swami, this may interest you. And when it came to Etihad jet deal, the same cabinet takes a decision in 1 month's time. Are we not supposed to read into it? 4 days. No, after the ministry formed it, I'm taking that much time. So when the ministry has sent it out, you take 2 years for Air India's decision, and you take 1 month for Jet Etihad. What are we supposed to read? Now, this was one part that you were trying to create a lot of kind of problems for Air India for the benefit of private airlines. Now, state accusation is there, I worked it out, how it was done for the benefit, withdrawal of flights by Air India, etc., etc. Now, the story does not end here. Okay, at one point when you say that Air Indians did not safeguard their turf, B, they were outsiders who were playing amok with Air India's fortunes. The third part, which is the most critical part, was that even if, as I say in the aviation industry, that when you are touching ground and you are about 50, 70 feet above the ground level, you can still abort landing and take off. Air India could have done this. But in 2004-05, it was not just merger and the aircraft acquisition that put a huge financial liability on Air India. The plundering started. A series of decisions got taken which had no relevance or necessity for Air India. For example, we had old 747-400 aircraft. Let's go for refurbishing them at a cost of 400 crore. Even when the 6th aircraft is being refurbished, you said not worth it. Abandon the project. Why are you gone in for it? A310s, convert them into freighters. A big show is held to announce Air India's entry into cargo business. I produced those press reports of that era. But then you describe the aircraft as fuel guzzlers, uneconomical, and abandon the project. 300 crores again gone down the drain. The most important thing was on a biometric thing where a tender is floated for only 75 lakh value, but eventually when the tenders get open, it's 486 crores. A company, Canadian company, to benefit out of it. Fortunately, we could stall that. But imagine 486 crore. I've raised a simple question. Who took this decision ought to be found. For the simple reason, 7 years after 2006, when these tenders are floated, you don't still have the need for it. So clearly indicating there were a lot of innovative ideas emanating from somewhere to make huge expenditure. I don't have to spell out why. Now question comes in, when you take these kind of liabilities on it, you find a lot of wrong has gone about. Now the tragedy being, everyone knows Air India has from iconic status to brought down. People who are responsible, you can also speculate, but they are in big denial. They are not wanting to say that I am responsible. Now the book, as I've said, is a document of misdeeds, misdemeanors, and factors that led to Air India's financial incapacitation. Now I have done my part as I felt it, because when you look in retrospect, every decision that was made to look as being beneficial for Air India ended up harming Air India. Now there is a whole lot of 15 of these instances were narrated. If only these decisions had not been taken, Air India would not have been in a financial state that it is in. Shouldn't somebody be held responsible? Now the tragedy has been that while Sunil Arora and V. Subramaniam got punished for raising the sensible questions, those who helped harm Air India from within Air India got rewarded. Now, it can't be mere coincidence that some people get rewarded by way of post-retirement job or getting promotions and those kind of things. So that is where I've said, if you put it in record, perhaps someday someone will take note of. Dr. Subramanian Swamy being one of them, and says, because you have done your part, over to the courts, because you have little faith in the Indian bureaucracy, Indian Prime Minister's office, for what they can do or make use of the book to take sensible decisions. Don't allow exploitation of India's Navratnas and temples of modern India, as Pandit Nehru described it. Now the question is, if you can do this to Air India, you can perhaps do this to anything else, where personal greed gets priority over interests of what is necessary or what is essential for survival of Air India. It's a very unfortunate story. I felt sad writing it. And there were friends who said, aren't you naming too many people? I said, look, I can do a general kind of a thing that this is what led to Air India's decline. But people would say, where's the credibility? So I have to give instances, I have to narrate facts, and I have to name the people who have done this kind of a thing. Because I still have hope that someday somebody, a spirited person, maybe the gentleman sitting on my left, will take it up to the logical end, and those responsible will be held. And those responsible will be taken to task. Air India has been too precious. I have in the concluding chapter, and Dr. Swamy, when we had lunch a couple of weeks ago, I said, look, this is the kind of damages these decisions have caused. He quoted some law, which he may probably do it when he's speaking, and he said, hey, we can make these guys pay for it. Now, it may come out to something like 40,000 crore kind of a thing as a loss that Air India may have suffered. Now, question is, if you get these people who have taken these decisions and got away with it and made to pay, perhaps there's hope. Because when Ajit Singh makes a statement, you can't expect Air India to be run on public money for all times. I agree with him. But all I'm wanting, and I've written in the book, is that let well-wishers of Air India compute the statement of losses, one, attributing it to the government decisions and being a PSU organization, B, on account of the inefficiency of Air India employees, because they're also guilty to a certain extent. And let government first compensate Air India for the first part, the damage it's caused, and then say, I have the moral right to tell Air India now that I'm not going to give you any more money. You can't be the owner of Air India, taking decisions on its behalf, causing losses to Air India, and then have the arrogance to say, I'm not going to give you any more money. I think thank you very much for these comments.
Thank you, Mr. Bhargava.